So we are Basalt Architects. We are an architecture office in Iceland, downtown Reykjavik. And we do all kinds of projects from small to large scale. We are best known for our bathing projects in Iceland. Most prominent being the Blue Lagoon here in Reykjanes. But our latest addition is Vök Baths in the east of Iceland. So we collaborated with Design Group Italia, who are located in Milano, and collaborated on the design of the mostly interiors and experience of the building. Perla engineers were responsible for all engineering of the project except for floating pools, which Bluet did. And our on-site construction managers were Vök Baths engineers. Vök is located by a lake that's called Urriðavatn, and this lake is unique due to a geothermal water source in the middle of the lake. So hot water is coming up on all parts of the lake. And throughout the centuries, people living around Lake Urriðavatn noticed these spots that were areas of the lake that weren't freezing during the wintertime. And actually the Icelandic name Vök, in plural vakir, means an ice-free opening in a lake. So people used to believe that there was some kind of monster or something living in the lake that would melt or break the ice. And these openings on Lake Urriðavatn were called tuskuvakir. So vakir being ice-free opening, and tuska meaning monster. It's an old Icelandic word. So these openings that formed naturally through the years have been the inspiration for the project, for the shape of the pools and the building and overall experience in the project. We have not designed a floating structure before, but we found it quite important that guests would be able to enter Lake Urriðavatn itself in this kind of vök, which we now call the floating pools. They're our vakir. So we worked quite closely with the client from the beginning. The directions were basically to do a geothermal spa or bath, but we created this and came up with this concept through the historical reference along with Design Group Italia. And they really liked this concept from the beginning, including the floating pools, which actually are the first of their kind in Iceland. We considered joining the fixed pools with floating ones, so the guests wouldn't have to exit the fixed pools to enter then the floating ones, being a long distance that you walk and being a little bit more comfortable during the winter time. This resulted difficult technically due to several reasons, mainly that it's difficult to control the water temperature between the pools if it's all one pool or all one water area. The other difficulty was there's a varying heights of the water in Lake Urriðavatn. It's not a tidal water, but it's not a sea water as such, but it does change during the year, depending on how much it rains. So in the end, the fixed and the floating pools are two separate areas, completely separate technically. The engineers had ideas about concrete pools in the lake, which didn't fit our concept for the project and didn't fit with not wanting to intervene with the nature of Lake Urriðavatn. A concrete pool is much more invasive than a floating one. Right now, the floating pools can be picked up and taken away without much disturbance in the lake itself, which was quite a positive point for us. We found Bluet through our research for floating pools, and found Bluet to be most qualified for this kind of project. Having done projects in Finland in similar climates, it was quite valuable for the project, actually. There was a clear division between us, Bluet and Perla. We basically designed the concept and the form, while Bluet was responsible for all technical aspects of the floating pools. And then basically Bluet had responsibilities from the land edge and to all that's on the lake side, and Epla had responsibility technically from the lake edge and inward to the land. Bluet assisted in reaching a final shape of the pools, which would be feasible for all aspects, both technical and conceptual. So we worked closely in reaching that shape, basically. It worked very smoothly. We had 2 full-day workshops with everyone involved, where everyone came together around the table, and this was very important for the cooperation. So it gave us a mutual understanding for the subject at hand, and during these workshops, everyone had their responsibility and their role quite clearly. And the work process after the workshops was basically just having Skype meetings and sharing drawings, online emailing, until getting a final product. After our initial meeting with Bluet, we didn't have much concerns for the pools because of their professionality and experience with these kinds of structures. In general, for the project, there was a concern about the timetable, but Bluet accepted this short process and delivered punctually during all phases. Well, the biggest challenge in the project were the irregular shapes of the pools and the infinity edge, which, as I mentioned earlier, we worked closely with Bluet in reaching these shapes so that the pools could be in balance, and so that so it wouldn't be too costly to make these irregular shapes. So in the end, we decided on one irregular shape that repeats itself with different views through the infinity edge. We have been positively surprised with Bluet's professionality and their engagement in the project. They've always been quite positive toward this kind of project, which I believe is also their first of kind. I guess the biggest surprise in the project is that so many people are jumping from the pools and into Lake Urriða, which is not, even though it's maybe a Finnish tradition, it's not an Icelandic one. So we are now looking into ways to heighten security aspect. We're looking into security aspects for this, actually. We are quite content. The floating pools have given Vök an identity here in Iceland, and in Iceland's bathing culture is quite unique to have these floating pools in the middle of a lake. So it's been quite, how would you say? They're basically known for their floating pools here in Iceland. And it's so important that it's given this kind of identity that everyone knows, oh, the floating pools, yeah, Vök, you know. It's not something that blends in with other bathing projects. This is a unique destination now because of the floating pools. We basically just learned about the possibilities of designing floating structures, and at this point we would not have done it differently in Vök.